Look at Grandpa in his rusty pickup. Narrated by Ray Callahan, 61, Mobile County, Alabama. The day the river changed hands. My name is Ray Callahan. I'm 61 years old, and I've spent most of my life making sure nobody ever had a reason to remember it. I was born in 1963 in a little clapboard house on Foul River, back when Theodore was still mostly pine forest and oyster boats. My daddy worked the dredge boats for the Corps of Engineers, and my mama took in ironing. We weren't poor the way the television likes to show poor. We had a roof, a black and white Zenith, and a deep freezer full of mullet and deer meat. But we sure weren't Whitlocks. Nobody on our side of Dog River ever confused the two. I was 16 when the AC bug bit me. Summer of '79, I was helping Mr. Leroy McLean change a compressor on a window unit behind the old A&P on Dolphin Street. He let me keep the $20 bill the lady paid him, and that was that. I enrolled in night classes at Bishop Tulane, then Bishop State, learned refrigeration, electrical, brazing, the whole trade. By 21, I had a van with my name hand-painted on the side and a pager the size of a brick. In 1988, I married Darlene Marie Fontmo from Bayou La Batre. Prettiest girl I ever laid eyes on. Hair the color of wet sand. Laugh like wind chimes. We bought the little brick ranch on Dawes Road for $48,000 and a 10.5% mortgage that felt like a death sentence. 9 months later, Lauren Elizabeth Callahan came into the world screaming her head off, and for a while, everything was perfect. Then the cancer found Darlene in '97, 34 years old. By the time they caught it, it was already in her liver and her bones. She fought for 18 months, and I fought right alongside her, working days, sitting up nights at Providence Hospital, selling everything that wasn't nailed down to pay the part the insurance wouldn't. When she died, I buried her in Magnolia Cemetery under a cedar tree, and I buried a piece of myself right there with her. Lauren was 9. After the funeral, I sat on the tailgate of my work van and made myself 2 promises. 1, my little girl would never want for anything I could give her. 2, nobody would ever be able to take anything away from us again. That second promise is the one that changed everything. I kept the AC business running. Had to. The bills didn't stop just because Darlene did. But at night, after Lauren was asleep, I started reading. Not novels, not the Bible, though I still went to Dolphin Way Baptist every Sunday so Lauren could go to Sunday school with the other kids. No, I read annual reports, SEC filings, Lloyd's List, Shipping Gazette, anything I could get my hands on. The big office buildings I serviced downtown, Mobile Shipping Exchange, Cooper T. Smith, the Port Authority. They all threw out reams of paper every week. I started fishing the good stuff out of the dumpsters before the trash trucks came. I learned which terminals were losing money because they couldn't handle the new Panamax ships. I learned which tug companies were one hurricane away from bankruptcy. I learned how to read a balance sheet like some men read playbooks. And I learned that the men in the mahogany offices upstairs never noticed the man in the khaki uniform who came in at 2 a.m. to change their filters and empty the trash. In 1999, a little container feeder line out of Pascagoula went Chapter 11. The bankruptcy trustee was selling everything that wasn't bolted down. I took the $15,000 I'd saved for Lauren's braces, opened an E-Trade account under the name RC Deepwater, LLC, and bought 200 shares of their bonds at 17 cents on the dollar. 6 months later, Maersk bought the route for cash, and those bonds paid 100 cents plus accrued interest. I paid the orthodontist and still had money left. That was the first brick. Brick by brick, year by year, I built something nobody could see. I bought a bankrupt shipyard in Theodore for pennies on the dollar in 2003, fixed the dry dock on myself on weekends, leased it to Bender Shipbuilding, tripled my money in 4 years. I bought distressed warehouse bonds after Katrina, converted them to equity when the REIT restructured, sold out in 2011 for 32 times what I paid. I never sold anything with my real name on it. Every deal went through a different LLC, a different trust, a different state. Wyoming for privacy, South Dakota for the trust, Delaware for the corporations, Nevada when I needed an extra layer. By the time Lauren was a sophomore at Alabama, my net worth had cleared 8 figures. By the time she graduated summa cum laude with a degree in communications and moved into a condo in Mountain Brook paid for by scholarships, it had cleared 9. And still she never knew. She met Trip Whitlock at the 2016 Azalea Trail Maid Ball. Trip was tall, blonde, wore navy blazers like he was born in them. His people had been members of the Mystic Crew of the Mobile Carnival Association since 1892. Lauren brought him home exactly once. I was in the garage rebuilding the carburetor on a '76 Chevy Caprice, greased to my elbows. Leonard Skinner on the radio. Trip shook my hand like he was afraid he'd get dirty. Lauren spent the whole visit staring at the floor. After that, the stories got creative. Daddy travels for work. Daddy's between opportunities right now. Daddy moved to Costa Rica to consult on eco-friendly HVAC systems. I let her tell whatever fairy tale she needed. It was easier than the truth. Then came the wedding invitation. Thick cream stock, gold foil borders, calligraphy so fancy I needed cheaters to read it.
Mr. and Mrs. Harrison Whitlock III request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their son William Tripp Whitlock to Lauren Elizabeth Callahan, Saturday, the 14th of May, 6 o'clock in the evening, Oakley Plantation, Mobile, Alabama. I stood in my kitchen holding that card for a long time. Part of me wanted to frame it. Part of me wanted to light it on fire. In the end, I did what I always did. I wrapped a $12 coffee mug from Walmart in Sunday's press register, tied it with the only ribbon I had left over from Christmas, and figured I'd slip in the back, smile when everybody else smiled, and leave before the cake was cut. I had no idea the Whitlock empire was already mine. See, the shipping business had been dying a slow death for 3 solid years. Fuel through the roof, insurance tripled after Ida and Zeta, every major carrier rerouting to Savannah and Charleston because Mobile's channel was still only 45 feet deep and the new megaships needed 50. Whitlock Shipping and Terminals was leveraged 9 ways to Sunday. Senior bank debt, mezzanine bonds, personal guarantees signed by Harrison Whitlock III himself. They missed a debt covenant in December. The banks issued a waiver, but it came with a price. Harrison had to find new money by May 15th, or the lenders would take the keys. I knew all this because I had been buying their paper in the secondary market since February, quietly, through a South Dakota-directed trust that didn't have to disclose beneficiaries. By April, I controlled 68% of their secured debt and 100% of their high-yield bonds. I had the votes to force a restructuring whether Harrison liked it or not. On the 1st of May, I made him an offer through a New York law firm he'd never heard of. $180 million cash, all debt retired, every union and non-union employee kept on payroll. Harrison stays on as executive chairman with a corner office and a 7-figure salary, but 0 voting shares. It was $20 million more than the assets were worth on paper, but it let him save face, keep his daddy's name on the letterhead, and tell the carnival crew he'd brought in strategic capital partners. He signed the papers on May 3rd without ever asking who was on the other side of the table. The buyer was listed as RC Deepwater Holdings, a Delaware LLC with no public beneficial owner. Harrison shook the lawyer's hand, poured himself a Double Eagle Rare, and started planning his son's wedding like a man who'd just dodged the hangman. He had no idea the hangman was the father of the bride. The day of the wedding, I showered twice, put on the same navy blazer I'd worn to Lauren's high school graduation, pressed my one pair of dress khakis, and drove the old '98 Ford down Highway 90 toward Oakley Plantation. The truck coughed blue smoke like always. The clear coat had peeled off in sheets years ago, leaving gray primer patches that made it look like a redneck camouflage job. The valets in white gloves took one look and waved me toward the overflow gravel lot like I was delivering the flowers. I parked between a John Deere Gator and a '72 El Camino on blocks, grabbed the newspaper-wrapped gift off the seat, tucked it under my arm, and started the long walk across the lawn. The plantation house was lit up like Cinderella's castle. White lights in the live oaks, lanterns hanging from the branches, a string quartet playing Vivaldi under a tent big enough for a circus. Women in gowns the color of cotton candy, men in cream dinner jackets with bow ties the size of butterflies. I smelled money and gardenias and the faint tang of the bay drifting in on the breeze. I was halfway across the grass when Lauren spotted me. She was on the front steps in her wedding gown, veil floating behind her like a cloud, surrounded by bridesmaids in pale blue silk. Tripp stood beside her in his white dinner jacket, grinning for the photographer. The man kept shouting, "One more, big smiles, look at each other like you're in love." That's when Lauren saw the truck. And then she saw me climbing out of it. Her smile froze solid, then it twisted into something meaner than I'd ever seen on her mama's face. She cupped her hands around her mouth and hollered across the lawn, loud enough for every soul in Mobile County to hear. "Y'all, look! Grandpa showed up in his rusty pickup. Bless his heart, he's been driving that thing since Jesus was in diapers." Laughter exploded like buckshot. Phones came out. A woman in pearls turned to her husband and said, "That's the father of the bride? Mercy." Somebody started a slow clap. A teenage cousin filmed it for TikTok. I just kept walking, boots crunching on the oyster shells, holding that newspaper-wrapped coffee mug like it was the Hope Diamond. Tripp's face went red. He tried to shush her, but Lauren was on a roll now, high on adrenaline and Veuve Clicquot. She pointed straight at me. "Everybody wave at Ray! He still thinks duct tape is a fashion statement." The laughter got crueler. Harrison Whitlock stood on the porch in his cream jacket, chuckling along with the rest, raising his glass in a mock toast to the joke at my expense. I stopped 20 feet from the steps. The crowd parted like I smelled bad. I could feel every eye, every smirk, every whispered, "Well, I never." That's when Harrison's chuckle died in his throat.
He'd been looking at my face. Really looking, maybe for the first time in his life. Something clicked behind his eyes like a padlock snapping open. I watched the blood drain out of him so fast I thought he'd keel over right there on the antebellum bricks. His bourbon glass slipped from his fingers and shattered into 1,000 pieces. "Ray," he croaked, voice barely carrying over the cicadas. "Ray Callahan!" Lauren was still giggling with her bridesmaids. She didn't hear him at first. Harrison took one wobbly step forward, then another, until he was close enough that only the people on the steps could hear. "Ray Callahan! You're RC!" The laughter faltered. People sensed blood in the water, but didn't know whose. I looked Harrison Whitlock dead in the eye and answered in the same slow Delta drawl I use when I'm quoting an AC repair. "Reckon I am, Harrison." His knees actually buckled. Tripp's best man caught him by the elbow before he hit the ground. Lauren finally noticed something was wrong. "Daddy Whitlock, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Harrison couldn't take his eyes off me. He turned to the crowd, found his voice somehow, and announced loud enough for the valets to hear all the way back by the gravel lot. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce Mr. Ray Callahan of Theodore, Alabama. As of 11 days ago, he owns Whitlock Shipping and Terminals, lock, stock, barrel, and every crane on the river, every paycheck on the dock, every ship with our family name painted on the bow belongs to the man standing right here in the Sears blazer." You could have heard a shrimp drop.
Lauren's bouquet slipped from her fingers and hit the brick steps with a soft, final thud. White roses scattered everywhere, like somebody had just surrendered. I just stood there holding my $12 coffee mug wrapped in yesterday's newspaper, listening to the cicadas start back up, and waited to see what my little girl would do when she finally learned who her daddy really was.
The silence after the thunder. The roses were still rolling down the steps when the first phone hit the oyster shells. Some sorority sister of Lauren's dropped hers clean out of her hand, mouth open like a bass on a dock. Another woman, pearls, big hair, Mobile's answer to Dolly Parton, actually crossed herself like she'd seen the devil walk up the driveway in work boots. The string quartet forgot what song they were playing and just sawed the same 3 notes over and over until the violinist finally gave up and let the bow squeak to silence. Harrison Whitlock was swaying on his feet like a longleaf pine in a hurricane. Tripp had both arms around his daddy now, trying to keep him upright, whispering, "Daddy, breathe, come on now, breathe." But Harrison couldn't breathe. He was staring at me like I was the ghost of every bad decision he'd ever made come back to collect the note. And Lauren, my Lauren, the little girl who used to fall asleep on my chest while I rocked her on the front porch swing, she was staring too, only her face wasn't pale. It was red, redder than the primer on my old truck, red like the shame and fury were fighting inside her, and shame was losing bad. She took 1 step down the stairs, veil catching the breeze, and her voice came out high and brittle, the same voice she used when she was 6 and I caught her lying about breaking Mama's good lamp. "Daddy Whitlock, what in the hell are you talking about?" Harrison flinched at the word hell coming out of a bride's mouth on her wedding day, but he didn't correct her. He couldn't. He was too busy trying to swallow his tongue. I shifted the newspaper-wrapped coffee mug to my left hand and finally spoke again, slow and easy, the way you talk to a spooked horse. "Harrison, you sure you want to do this right here, right now, in front of God and half of Mobile?" He found his voice, but it cracked like a 12-year-old's. "Ray, Mr. Callahan, I didn't know. I swear on my mama's grave I didn't know it was you. The lawyer said the buyer wanted anonymity. I never dreamed. He stopped because there wasn't anything else to say. Lauren's head snapped toward me so fast I thought her neck would break. "Daddy?" That one word came out small, real small. The kind of small that happens when a person's whole world tilts 45 degrees and everything they thought they knew slides off the table. I looked at her. Really looked at her for the first time that night. She was beautiful. Lord, she was. Darlene's cheekbones, my mama's eyes. But the meanness was still there, curled around the edges of her mouth like smoke. "Baby girl," I said, "I reckon it's time we all went inside and had us a conversation, unless you want the nice folks on TikTok doing the talking for us." Somebody in the crowd whimpered. I'm pretty sure it was the mother of the bridegroom. Tripp finally found his spine. He stepped forward, still holding his daddy up, and spoke in that polished Spring Hill accent they teach boys at McGill-Tulane. "Sir, Mr. Callahan, maybe we could use the library. It's private." I nodded once. "Lead the way, son." And just like that, the wedding stopped dead. The photographer kept clicking out of pure muscle memory. Bridesmaids stood frozen like department store mannequins. The poor caterers peeked out from behind the azalea bushes, trays of shrimp remoulade trembling in their hands. Harrison, Tripp, Lauren, and me, we walked across that wide veranda and through the front doors of Oakley Plantation like a funeral procession nobody had bothered to tell us was a wedding. Inside, the house smelled like old money and lemon oil. Portraits of dead Whitlocks glared down at us from the walls. Men with mutton chop whiskers and women in bombazine dresses who looked like they'd never smiled a day in their lives. Our footsteps echoed on the heart pine floors. Tripp led us to the library. Heavy oak doors,
floor-to-ceiling books that I'd bet my truck nobody in this family had ever cracked. He closed the doors behind us, and the noise of the crowd outside got muffled down to a dull surf. Harrison sank into a leather wingback like his legs had given out. Tripp stayed standing. Lauren stood in the middle of the Persian rug in her $10,000 dress, veil still on, looking for all the world like a lost little girl playing dress-up. I set the newspaper-wrapped coffee mug on a side table next to a bronze sculpture of a horse that probably cost more than my house.
Then I waited. Lauren spoke first, voice shaking. "Daddy, tell me he's lying. Tell me this is some kind of sick joke." I reached into the inside pocket of my blazer, the one I'd worn so many times the lining was shiny, and pulled out a single folded sheet of paper. Heavy cream stock, same as the wedding invitation. Only this one had the letterhead of Sullivan and Cromwell, New York's oldest law firm. I unfolded it slow and handed it to her. She took it like it might bite her. At the top, in bold, closing statement, acquisition of Whitlock Shipping and Terminals, Inc. and subsidiaries, purchaser, RC Deepwater Holdings, LLC. Date, May 3rd, current year. Total consideration, USD 180 million United States dollars. 180 million United States dollars. She grabbed my hand like it was the only solid thing left in her world. "What happens now?" she whispered. I stood up, looked at Harrison, looked at Tripp, looked at the closed library doors where 200 people were waiting to see what came next. "Now," I said, "we decide what kind of people we're gonna be when we walk out those doors. Because the story that gets told tonight is the one Mobile's going to be chewing on for the next 50 years, and I reckon all of us got a say in how it ends." Harrison struggled to his feet. "Ray, anything. Name it. You own the company, you own the debt, you own us, whatever you want." I shook my head slow. "I don't want your company, Harrison. I already got it. What I want is something a whole lot harder to give." I looked at Lauren again. "I want my daughter back. The one who used to ride around in my work van eating Zagnut bars and singing Wagon Wheel off key. The one who didn't care what anybody thought because her daddy could fix anything with a roll of duct tape and a prayer." Lauren was crying so hard she could barely breathe. I'm still her, Daddy. I just got lost." I reached down and pulled her to her feet. Held her the way I hadn't held her since she was 12 years old and ashamed of me for the first time. Outside, somebody started clapping slow, then faster. Then the whole damn crowd was cheering like the Crimson Tide just scored on the last play of the Iron Bowl. We hadn't even opened the doors yet. Tripp looked at his daddy, looked at me, and did something I'll never forget as long as I live. He walked over, took the newspaper-wrapped coffee mug off the table, unwrapped it careful like it was made of glass, and set it on the mantel under the Confederate general's portrait. Then he turned to me and said, clear as day, "Mr. Callahan, sir, would you do us the honor of walking your daughter down the aisle? I think the groom's side of the family just realized we're the ones who need to be grateful today." Harrison nodded so hard I thought his head would fall off. Lauren looked up at me, mascara everywhere, veil crooked, lipstick half gone, and for the first time in 20 years, she looked exactly like my little girl again. "Daddy, will you?" I looked at the closed doors, looked at the coffee mug sitting proud on that mantel, looked at the 3 people in that room who were fixing to decide whether this night ended in grace or in ruin. Then I took my daughter's arm, tucked it through mine the way I'd practiced in my head 1,000 times and never thought I'd get to do. "Reckon I will, baby girl," I said, "but we're fixing to do it my way." And with that, I opened those big oak doors and walked my daughter out onto the veranda to give her away
Not as the poor AC man from Theodore, and not as the secret billionaire who owned the river, but as her daddy, the man she should never have been ashamed of in the first place. The walk, the words, and the weight of 50 years. I opened those library doors, and the evening air hit us like a wall of wet cotton. The sun had slipped behind the live oaks while we were inside, and now the whole plantation was lit up in soft gold and white. Thousands of tiny bulbs strung through the trees like somebody had caught lightning bugs in mason jars and hung them from the branches. The crowd had swollen. Word travels faster than gossip in a beauty shop when old money smells blood in the water. I'd guess 300 people were packed onto that veranda and the lawn beyond, phones up, champagne forgotten, waiting to see what came next. The string quartet had given up entirely. One poor cellist was just plucking the same low note over and over like a heartbeat. I stepped out first, Lauren on my right arm, her fingers digging into my forearm so hard I could feel her pulse racing through the sleeve of my 15-year-old blazer. Tripp was on her left, Harrison one step behind us like a man walking to his own execution. The four of us moved like we were tied together with invisible rope. Every eye in Mobile County was on us. And then, Lord help me, somebody started clapping. Not the slow, sarcastic clap from before, real clapping, the kind that starts with one person and spreads like wildfire in dry grass. A woman in a lavender gown I'd recognized from the junior league put her hands together first. Then a dock foreman I'd kept on payroll last Christmas when Harrison wanted to lay off half the longshoremen. Then a tugboat captain whose pension I'd personally guaranteed. Pretty soon the whole damn crowd was clapping. Not for the bride, not for the groom, but for the man in the Sears blazer who just turned their world inside out. Lauren's breath hitched beside me. She wasn't expecting that. Hell, neither was I. We reached the top of the wide front steps. The aisle had been laid down the center of the lawn. White runner, rose petals, lanterns flickering on shepherd's hooks all the way to the arbor where the minister waited. 250 chairs on each side, every one filled now. Bridesmaids and groomsmen stood frozen halfway down like somebody had pressed pause on a movie. I leaned my head toward Lauren and spoke low so only she and Tripp could hear. "You ready, baby girl?" She swallowed hard and nodded, tears still cutting tracks through her makeup. "Then let's give these people a story they'll tell their grandbabies." I took the first step. The clapping stopped like somebody flipped a switch. You could hear the cicadas again, loud as chainsaws. I walked slow, not because I was savoring it, though part of me was, but because I wanted every soul there to get a good long look. I wanted them to see the scuffed, square-toe boots I'd worn to work for 12 years, the khakis with the permanent crease from hanging in my work van, the navy blazer with the shiny elbows. I wanted them to see the hands that had changed compressors in 115-degree heat and still had refrigerant burns on the knuckles. I wanted them to see the man Lauren had spent half her life pretending wasn't her daddy. Halfway down the aisle, I felt Lauren start to shake. Not little tremors, full body shaking like she was freezing in that satin gown. I stopped, right there in front of God and everybody. I turned to her, took both hands in mine, and spoke loud enough that the people in the back row heard every word. "Lauren Elizabeth, you listen to me. 25 years ago, your mama and I stood in front of a preacher in a little cinder block church on Moffett Road. I didn't have $50 to my name that day, but I made her a promise, and I'm going to make you the same one right now." I squeezed her hands. "I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. I will never let anybody hurt you if it's in my power to stop it. Not the banks, not the Whitlocks, not your fool mouth. You are my daughter, and that is the only title that ever mattered to me. You understand?" She was crying so hard she couldn't answer, just nodded like her head was on a spring. I looked past her to Tripp. "And you, son, you take care of her. You hear me? You love her when she's sweet, and you love her when she's meaner than a striped lizard. That's what marriage is. And if you ever make her cry for any reason except joy, you and me are going to have a conversation down on my dock with nobody else around. We clear?" Tripp's eyes were wet, but he didn't look away. "Crystal clear, sir." I nodded once and tucked Lauren's hand back in the crook of my arm and finished the walk.
When we reached the arbor, the minister, an Episcopal priest who looked like he'd aged 10 years and 10 minutes, cleared his throat. "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" I didn't hesitate. Her mother in heaven and her daddy right here on earth, and we give her with our whole hearts. Then I did something nobody expected. I didn't hand her off and go sit down. I stepped up onto the platform with him. The priest's eyebrows shot up so high they nearly disappeared into his hairline. I leaned in and whispered, "Keep going, Reverend. I got one thing to say first." He gulped and nodded. I turned to face the crowd. 300 faces staring back, some ashamed, some awed, some calculating what this meant for their own little empires. I didn't raise my voice, didn't need to. You could have heard a gnat fart. Most of y'all know me as Ray the AC man, the one who'll come out on Christmas Eve if your heat goes out, the one who'll work for cash and a glass of sweet tea. Some of y'all laughed at me not 30 minutes ago when my daughter pointed me out like I was the joke of the night. I let that sit. I didn't come here tonight to shame nobody. I surely didn't come to ruin my little girl's wedding. But since the good Lord saw fit to pull the curtain back, I reckon there's a few things need saying. I looked straight at Harrison Whitlock, sitting in the front row, hands clasped so tight his knuckles were white. "Harrison, 18 months ago, you were fixing to lose everything your granddaddy and daddy built. 3,000 men were fixing to be out of work 2 weeks before Christmas. You remember that night you called me crying at 2 in the morning, asking if I knew anybody with cash money?" Harrison nodded slow like he couldn't believe this was happening. "I was that anybody. I didn't buy your company to own you. I bought it to save it. Every one of those men still has a job because I paid $20 million more than it was worth on paper. I kept every promise I made you in those papers, and I didn't ask for a single thank you. All I asked was nobody ever know it was me." I looked out over the crowd. I lived in a 3-bedroom brick house worth maybe $180,000. I drove a '98 pickup with 286,000 miles on it. I ate bologna sandwiches and drank coffee black because it was cheaper. And every night for 30 years, I came home from fixing other people's air conditioners and worked till 3 in the morning building something nobody could take away from my little girl. I turned back to Lauren. She was crying again, but different this time. Quiet, like the crying was coming from some place deeper than tears usually reach. I told her, I didn't do it for gratitude. I surely didn't do it for this. I swept my hand to take in the plantation, the gowns, the lanterns. I did it because when your mama died, I promised you nobody would ever make you feel small again. And somewhere along the way, I let you make me feel small instead. My voice cracked on that last part. I didn't care who heard it. Lauren stepped forward, took my face in both her trembling hands, and spoke loud enough for the microphones to catch it. "Daddy, I was wrong. I was wrong every day I let you think I was ashamed of you. I was wrong every time I lied about who you were. You are the best man I've ever known, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure every person in this city knows it." Then, right there in front of mobile society, my daughter wrapped her arms around my neck and held on like she was 5 years old and the world was ending. The crowd lost it. People were standing, clapping, crying. Old men who'd known my daddy were wiping their eyes with linen handkerchiefs. Women who'd turned their nose up to me 10 minutes ago were hugging each other like we just won the war. I held her for a long time. When we finally pulled apart, Tripp stepped up, took Lauren's hand, and looked at me. "Sir, I believe the father of the bride just stole the show, but if it's all right with you, I'd like to marry your daughter now." I laughed. Couldn't help it. First real laugh I'd had in years. "Go on, son," I said.
She's yours, but remember what I told you." The ceremony itself was short after that. The priest rushed through the vows like he was afraid lightning would strike if he took too long. When he got to the "you may kiss the bride" part, Tripp kissed Lauren so gentle it brought fresh tears to half the crowd. Then he turned to me, stuck out his hand, and said loud and clear, "Mr. Callahan, welcome to the family, officially." I shook it, hard. After that, the reception turned into something I still can't explain. The band started playing Sweet Home Alabama unironically, and dock workers started two-stepping with women in designer gowns. Somebody found my old truck, washed it, and parked it right up front under the porte-cochere like it was the finest Rolls Royce in the fleet. Kids were climbing in the bed taking selfies. One drunk groomsman put a bow tie around the hood ornament. I lost count of how many people came up to shake my hand, to apologize, to thank me for saving their brother's job, their cousin's pension, their daddy's tugboat company. Harrison got drunker than Cooter Brown and kept trying to give me his grandfather's Rolex. I made him keep it. Around 10 o'clock, Lauren found me sitting on the back steps, drinking a Miller High Life somebody had pressed into my hand. She sat down beside me, kicked off her heels, and laid her head on my shoulder like she used to when she was little. "Daddy, I need to ask you something." "Shoot. Are you going to fire Tripp's daddy?" I took a long pull off the bottle. Nah, man's got too much pride to lose in one night. He'll stay on as chairman. I'll handle the money. He can handle the ribbon cuttings and the carnival balls. As long as the numbers work, we'll get along fine. She was quiet for a minute. "And us?" she asked, voice small again. "Are we going to be okay?" I put my arm around her shoulders. "Baby girl, we're just getting started." That's when the fireworks started. Somebody, Harrison, I later found out, had hired the same company that does the 4th of July over the bay. Red, white, and blue explosions lit up the sky, reflected in the water of the fish pond, turned every face gold and wondering. Under the booms and whistles, Lauren whispered the words I had waited 30 years to hear. "I love you, Daddy, and I'm proud you're my father." I kissed the top of her head and didn't even try to hide the tears. Later, when the last guests were leaving and the caterers were breaking down tables, I walked out to my old truck. Somebody had washed it again and written in the condensation on the windshield, "Thank you, Ray, Mobile." I got in, turned the key, and the old Ford started on the first try like it knew tonight was special. I drove slow, windows down, letting the warm May air blow through my cab. When I pulled into my driveway, the little brick house looked smaller than ever, but for the first time in decades, it didn't feel like a disguise. It felt like the place where the story started. I sat there a long time with the engine ticking as it cooled, thinking about everything that had changed in one night and everything that hadn't. Because money can buy a lot of things. It can buy shipping companies and fireworks and forgiveness from people who never deserved to judge you in the first place. But it can't buy back the years you lost pretending to be less than you were. That part, only love can fix. And love, thank God, was finally coming home. What we built when the lights went out. The morning after the wedding, Mobile woke up hungover on more than just champagne. By 7 o'clock, my name was on every front porch from Dauphin Island to Citronelle. The Press Register had already killed their Sunday edition and slapped together a special. Janitor Dad buys bride's empire, $180 million wedding surprise. Somebody had snapped a grainy cell phone shot of me walking Lauren down the aisle, her veil blowing sideways, my old blazer shining at the elbows. They ran it above the fold with the headline in 72-point type. I didn't see it until later. I was too busy staring at my own kitchen ceiling at 4:30 a.m., listening to the window unit rattle like it always did, and wondering if the whole night had been a fever dream. It wasn't. At 5:17, my phone started ringing off the hook. First, it was Harrison, voice hoarse from bourbon and crying, asking if I wanted coffee at the Battle House. Then Tripp, asking if they could bring breakfast to my house. Then Lauren, my Lauren, crying so hard I could barely understand her, begging to come home. Home? She hadn't called my little brick ranch home since she was 17. I told them all the same thing. Give me till noon. I needed to think. I made coffee the way I always did, 1 scoop of Folgers in a pot older than Lauren, and carried it out to the garage. Sat on the same rolling stool I'd used for 30 years, surrounded by toolboxes and refrigerant gauges and the smell of 30-weight oil. The quiet was the same. The cracked concrete floor was the same. The little radio on the bench was still tuned to 106.5, playing Hank Williams Jr. like nothing had changed. Everything had changed. At 8:03, a black Escalade pulled into my driveway, so slow you'd have thought they were scared the potholes would swallow 'em whole. Harrison, Tripp, and Lauren climbed out looking like they'd slept in a ditch. Lauren was wearing one of Tripp's Oxford shirts and a pair of my old sweatpants she must have found in her childhood bedroom. Her hair was in a messy knot, no makeup, eyes swollen. She walked straight into the garage, dropped to her knees on the greasy floor, and wrapped her arms around my waist like she was 8 years old again. "I'm sorry, Daddy. I'm sorry for every single day I made you feel small." I set my coffee down and held her. Just held her. Harrison and Tripp stood in the doorway looking like 2 boys waiting for a whipping. After a long time, I said, "Y'all come on in the house. Coffee's hot." We sat around my Formica kitchen table, the same one Darlene and I bought at the flea market in '89, and nobody said a word for 10 full minutes, just the sound of spoons clinking and the window unit humming. Harrison broke first. "Ray," he said, voice raw from bourbon and crying, "I spent 30 years thinking I was better than most folks because my granddaddy had a bigger boat. Last night you showed me and every friend I've got that character ain't measured in net worth. I don't even know how to start making that right." I sipped my coffee. You start by being a better man today than you were yesterday. That's all any of us get. Lauren reached across the table and took my hand. Her nails were still perfect from the wedding, but the rest of her looked like stripped down to the real girl I'd lost somewhere along the way. "Daddy, I need to say some things out loud, and I need you to hear them." I nodded. She took a shaky breath. "I spent my whole life trying to outrun where I came from. I thought if I married into the right family, lived in the right neighborhood, sent my kids to the right schools, nobody would ever know my daddy fixed air conditioners for a living. I thought that made me safe. Turns out it just made me cruel." Her voice cracked. "I'm quitting the junior league. I'm selling every designer thing I own. Tripp and I are moving into a little house on the bay, nothing fancy, and I'm going to get a job, a real job. I don't care if it's waiting tables. I need to learn what things actually cost when you don't have somebody secretly paying for them." Tripp cleared his throat. "I'm starting Monday as operations manager down at Terminal 5, under the union contract. Same pay as any other college boy with a clipboard. My daddy doesn't get a say in my raises anymore." Harrison looked like he'd been gut-shot, but he nodded. "It's right." Then I told them the truth I decided at 4:30 that morning. "I'm selling the company back to the employees." 3 heads snapped up. "Not to Harrison," I said, looking at him. "To the men and women who actually make the cranes move and the ships sail. ESOP, Employee Stock Ownership Plan. 1 share per year of service. 10 years from now, every longshoreman, every clerk, every tug captain will own a piece of the company their sweat built. Harrison, you can stay on as chairman if you want, but the board will be elected by the people who work the docks, not the country club." Harrison's eyes filled up. "Ray, that's the most generous thing I ever heard." "It ain't generous," I said. "It's fair." Lauren was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. "What about us?" she whispered. "The money? The house? Everything?" I leaned back in my chair and told her the rest. "I'm keeping enough to take care of myself and to set up a foundation, Darlene's name on it. scholarships for kids whose mamas work nights, trade school money for boys who ain't college material, a fund for widows who lose their husbands to cancer and still gotta pay the light bill. The rest goes into the ESOP and into trusts for my grandchildren, whatever you and Tripp give me one day. They'll never want, but they'll never be able to sit on their backsides either. Money's got to have a job or it rots the soul. I looked at Lauren dead in the eye. You want to be my daughter again? Then you come as you are. Not as Mrs. William Tripp Whitlock IV from Spring Hill, just Lauren Elizabeth Callahan from Theodore, Alabama. You bring your husband, you bring your babies when they come, and you sit at this same table and eat bologna sandwiches if that's what I cooked. You proud of me when I'm in grease-stained khakis, and I'll be proud of you when you're wiping baby spit up off your shoulder at 3 a.m. That's the deal. She started crying again, but this time she was smiling through it. Deal, she said. Harrison stood up, walked around the table, and did something I never thought I'd live to see. He dropped to one knee on my cracked linoleum like he was proposing. Ray Callahan, will you let me work for you? Not as the old boss, but as a man trying to earn back his dignity. Whatever job you'll have me, I'll do it. I looked at him a long time. Then I stuck out my hand and pulled him up. First job's tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. You're riding with me to the terminal. We're going to tell 3,000 people the company belongs to them now, and you're buying the breakfast biscuits. He laughed through his tears. Yes, sir. The next 6 months were the hardest and best of my life. I moved out of the little brick house, gave it to a widow with 3 kids whose husband died on an oil rig, bought a modest place on Foul River with a dock and a tin roof that sings when it rains. Nothing fancy, but paid for. Lauren and Tripp sold their condo in Mountain Brook and bought a 1940s cottage on Old Shell Road that needed more work than they knew what to do with. I spent weekends there teaching Tripp how to sweat copper pipe and Lauren how to refinish heart pine floors. We ate off a card table and laughed till we couldn't breathe. Harrison showed up every morning at 5:45 in starched khakis and a company polo, no more cream dinner jackets. He lost 30 pounds, deigned calluses, and learned every crane operator's name. When the ESOP closed, the employees voted him chairman anyway, not because of his last name, but because he'd earned it. Lauren got a job teaching financial literacy to a nonprofit for single moms. Turns out all those years watching me clip coupons and balance books in the dark had taught her something after all. And me? I went back to fixing air conditioners. Not because I needed the money, because I missed it. Missed the smell of refrigerant, the satisfaction of a unit humming smooth, the gratitude in a widow's eyes when the house cooled down on the hottest day of July. I kept the old Ford. Somebody offered me $1 million for it after the story went national. I laughed and told him it still had another 100,000 miles left. 1 year to the day after the wedding, Lauren called me at dawn, voice shaken with happy tears. Daddy, can you come to the hospital? Your grandson decided to be born on the anniversary. I drove to Providence Hospital in that same rusty pickup, parked in the expecting father spot like I belonged there, and walked into the delivery room still wearing my grease-stained work shirt. Lauren reached for me the second she saw me. His name is Raymond Darlene Callahan Whitlock. We're calling him R.D. I held that tiny red-faced boy and felt something shift in my chest, like 30 years of weight finally lifted clean off. Later, when the nurses were gone, and it was just the 4 of us, me, Lauren, Tripp, and little R.D., Lauren looked at me and asked the question she'd been carrying for a year. Daddy, do you forgive me? For real? I thought about it a long time. Thought about every lie, every slight. Every night I came home to an empty house because she was ashamed to bring friends over. Thought about the wedding, the roses on the steps, the applause under the fireworks. Then I looked at my daughter, tired, beautiful, finally at peace, and I told her the truest thing I know. Baby girl, forgiveness ain't a feeling.
It's a choice I make every morning when I wake up and decide to love you anyway. And I chose it a long time ago. I was just waiting on you to choose it back." She cried then. We all did. Outside the window, the sun was coming up over Mobile Bay, turning the water the color of a new penny. Somewhere out there, ships were moving under cranes that belonged to the men who ran them. Somewhere downriver, a widow was opening her electric bill and finding it paid by a foundation she never heard of. Somewhere, a boy was learning to braze copper because somebody believed he was worth the investment. And in that little hospital room, a grandfather held his grandson and knew the story wasn't about the money after all. It never was. It was about a promise I made to a dying woman 30 years ago. Nobody will ever make our little girl feel small again. Turns out, the only person who ever really did that was her. And the only person who could fix it was us. Together.
I still drive that rusty '98 Ford. Still keep a toolbox in the back and a roll of duct tape on the dash. Still stop when I see somebody broke down on the side of the road. Only difference now is folks wave when they see me coming. And when they ask how a man who looks like a plain old mechanic ended up owning half the port, I just smile and tell them the same thing every time. Son, some of the richest men in the world never had a dime in the bank. They just had a daughter who finally learned what really matters. And if you ever find yourself in Mobile, Alabama, drive down Dolphin Island Parkway till you see an old red Ford with primer patches parked outside a little tin-roof house on the water. Knock on the door. Chances are I'll be on the porch drinking coffee, watching the tide come in, with a little boy on my knee, learning how to tie a bowline knot. And if you ask real nice, I might tell you the whole story. But only if you got time. Because it's a long one, and every word of it is true. The river still flows, the trucks still rattle, and love, quiet, stubborn, duct tape, and prayer love still holds everything together when money can't. That's the only empire that matters.